So, this week we're going to start off by diving into our second to last writing workshop. Now, we're kind of quickly coming up on wrap up of this pretty soon. Just to flash forward here, just a reminder where we are in terms of deadlines and pieces of information. All right, where is that? No. Where's I go looking for it? I can't find it. But there it is. So you'll see that actually writing workshop 4 is due basically come next Sunday. Okay. So this week we'll be working on our counter argument. And then you'll also be told on Friday to go ahead and start working on writing workshop 5, which is just adding your conclusion in your works cited page. Not a terribly hard lift, hopefully. Okay, hopefully. Now you'll see next week, I need to modify that. But next week, we're going to turn our attention to the peer review of our research paper. So that means by that point, we will hopefully have, in some form or another, all the parts of our paper, and I'll be streamlining that soon. But let's talk about writing workshop 4. So the focus of this section of our paper, and we previewed this last week, is to start thinking about adding on to and transitioning from our argument to our counter argument. And how does that work? Now, one of the things I'm going to need you guys to be clear upon is making clear use of transitions in your topic sentence. So what I'm saying here is the very first topic sentence, and I'll share an example later this week. So by the time we get around to Wednesday's lecture, I will hopefully have something for you so you can sort of see. But typically the topic sentence of your first counter argument paragraph needs to clearly do two things. It needs to not only express what the paragraph's about, but it needs to begin to transition us to this new section. Now, I've included some examples here. And here are some examples. Yet, some readers may challenge this view by insisting that blank. Of course, many will probably disagree on the grounds that these are two very common ones. And what they do is they sort of key the reader. If we don't have they key the reader to be expecting a shift. This shift is going to be you entertaining a counter argument, or planting a naysayer, or answering questions. And what I will share between now and Wednesday are some more specifics on that. But I've got a little exercise worksheet for you guys to look at and work on. I'm not going to ask that you submit it, but I am going to ask that you work on it as a way to sort of help you practice what you're going to be doing in your own paper. Now, the key thing here is this section is designed not to undermine your paper. We'll see that when we look at the worksheet here in a minute. But it is actually designed to enhance your argument by letting you play the part of embracing opposition or questions that might arise to your position and then answering them. Okay, it takes a very similar form to what we do when we integrate and explain a quotation. The only difference is that rather than introduce, integrate a source, cite it, and then explain it, connecting it back to our thesis, we introduce a naysayer or introduce a question or introduce a counter argument, give it a voice that might mean citing something, and then when we come time to explain it, we counter it. We return to our thesis and point out why our position is still the stronger one. Now, there are two types of ways to approach this. There really is the counter arguments. You don't need to pay attention to the date there. But there's what's called refutation and concession. All right. Now, and it talks about here about the two-part process. So first of all, we're engaged in what's called a refutatio, or a refutation or counter argument. This can be somewhere, and hopefully we should take up somewhere along the lines you see here, 4 to 5 paragraphs. Now, the purpose of this section is to engage our audience in kind of a manufactured debate. It's the best way to sort of frame it. Imagine that if you were having this debate with somebody face to face, if they disagreed with you, they would ask you something or point something out, and then you could go, oh, but wait, and you could then attempt to explain it. Well, the purpose of this is the fact that since we don't have that luxury in a written argument, we sort of end up playing both parts. And what you'll see here in a second is we're going to talk about the two ways. Now, we can refute them if they are wrong, or if we can answer their question, we do so. Sometimes, though, we have to engage in what's called concession. Now, for that, I want to scroll down here and I want to click on this little document here at the bottom called Planting a Naysayer. Now, this gets into a little bit more details about why we engage in this process. It says, although it is naturally tempting to ignore criticisms of your ideas when crafting an argument, doing so may in fact be a big mistake, since our writing improves when we not only listen to these objections, but give them explicit hearing in our writing. In fact, no single device more quickly improves a piece of persuasive writing and the credibility of the author, your ethos, than planting a naysayer in the text. In other words, imagining what others might say against your argument and addressing those objections head on. It's like a PR move. You're anticipating what people might say against you. You're going to bring it up and you're going to answer it so that it's not left hanging out there for an audience who you may never get to see. It talks about some advantages here. So, for example, it has the way of enhancing your credibility as a writer by coming across as open-minded and confident. It disarms critics. Now, we're not going to have time for you to answer every objection or every naysayer. You want to tackle the big ones. But it does show confidence, open-minded, and it does disarm some of your critics of your argument before they can point them out to you. And then finally, it shows respect to your readers by treating them as independent critical thinkers who are aware that your view is not the only one in town. Now, you've already seen this template here, some of the templates for doing this. Now, once you entertain a counter-argument, that's only the first step. You have to also rebut them. So it's a two-part process. Once you've decided to introduce a differing or opposing view into your writing, your work has only just begun, since you still need to represent and explain that view with fairness and generosity. When you entertain objections, you want to really bring them into your writing. Don't just skip over them. Spend a little time with them. Don't mock them. Okay? But once you've done that successfully, then it's your turn to respond to them. It's like a question-answer session. Okay? You can refute them. Sometimes that means that you will be able to flat out point out why they are wrong or why their information is out of date. Sometimes, though, there is what's called, and this oftentimes occurs when you cannot overcome a dispute completely, you might engage in what's called concession. It says here, rather than build your argument into a fortress, it is often best to make concessions while standing your ground. Kim Chernin does this in the following passage from a book complaining about the pressure of American women to lose weight and be thin. While entertaining the counter-argument, she writes, admit it, you like yourself better when you've lost weight. See, now, she starts off here, it sounds like she's conceding to what she's been opposing the whole time, but watch what she does. Admit it, you like yourself better when you've lost weight. Can I deny these things? No woman who's managed to lose weight would wish to argue with this. Most people feel better about themselves when they become slender. Now, up until this point, she has been engaged in concession. She's giving ground. But now, watch this right here. And yet, this is where she plants her heel in the ground and she stops retreating. Upon reflection, it seems to me that there is something precarious about this well-being. After all, 98% of people who lost weight gain it back. Indeed, 90% of those who have dieted successfully gain it back more than they ever lost. Then, of course, we can no longer bear to look at ourselves in the mirror. So see what she did here. I'm going to share another example later this week, but I want you to take notice of what she did here. She was obviously faced with a situation where it would seem ridiculous for her to come out flat out and oppose this opening line here about, no, you don't feel better when you've lost weight, because she knows that's ridiculous. However, she is only willing to give ground to a certain point, and then she turns around and returns to her own position and defends it. That is what concession looks like. And we have, of course, here some ideas for helping you introduce concessions. It says, although it may be granted that blanks, it still maintain blank. Proponents of X might be right to argue, but they exaggerate. So the idea here is that you give a little credit to your opposition, but you, again, are always returning to the idea of defending your own position. Now, normally in the course of a class, we would normally do these exercises. The first exercise here is the idea that you play the part of both roles. So here's an example. We need to own guns to protect ourselves against criminals. Okay? This exercise is really about recognizing bias. In the normal course of a class, I would ask you to write me 2 paragraphs. in one of those paragraphs, I want you to argue that we do need guns to protect ourselves. And then in the other paragraph, I'd ask you to argue the opposite. Okay, this is not unlike what you're doing with your own thesis statement. Consider whatever the antithesis of your thesis statement, that is where you would probably begin your counter argument section. Okay, so the idea being here is that if you wrote these two paragraphs and you didn't label them and somebody else read them, if they were able to figure out which was the side you really felt confident about, that would be a revelation about your bias. Normally, you either write more or less, and sometimes choice language gives those things away. It's really about thinking about our own bias, because when we do engage in a counter argument or a concession, we do want to make sure that we don't necessarily throw our bias in the face of our reader. And then the second part here is an example of practicing writing a section here right after this, and this right between this last body paragraph and this last conclusion paragraph. This person did not write a counter argument, and you can practice writing one example there as well. And they give you an example here of a sample naysayer and a sample counter argument that could be written in above. So if you want to go ahead and take a look at these exercises, I want to encourage you to do that, but I want you to start thinking about this as it relates to your own work and your own paper, so that we can then start really getting into this in the discussion forums, and then we'll return to this later this week as we finish up and start applying this to our own papers.